Okay, team, so next up in the DIY macros series, we have optimizing tracking accuracy. So if you are planning to track your intake for any length of time to enhance body composition, you're going to need to be somewhat accurate to make that happen. And before we go into learning how to make adjustments to our calorie and macronutrient intakes to continue to see results, we have to make sure we're tracking accurately enough in the first place, because we don't want to just start making changes when we could actually just become a little bit more consistent and adherent to our numbers in the first place, and then maybe we wouldn't have to make any adjustments. So let's dive straight into it. There's a fair bit to cover here. So tracking tips for accuracy. So you're never going to be 100% accurate with tracking. There's a whole bunch of variants in food labels. So the approval agencies for food labels give companies a certain amount of variance in what they can put on the label, so it's never going to be bang on. There's areas in the apps that we use to track these things, whether it's MyFitnessPal or otherwise, and then there's areas in our weighing, our personal weighing. So there's a whole bunch of variance there, so just realizing this up front, that you're never going to be 100% accurate, is really, really important, because it takes off some of that stress. Secondly, perfection is unattainable, so it's just about tracking as accurately as you can for your current situation, okay? There'll be days when you can't track every meal, there'll be days where you forget something, but it's a case of trying to be as consistent as you can with your current situation. Maybe you track accurately 6 days of the week, and then there's a one day where you have a slightly more flexible day or a non-track day. That's totally fine. You're getting the majority of your benefit from those 6 days of tracking, and then throughout that tracking period, you are learning so much that is going to then roll over and be implemented into non-tracking days, which is essential, which is one of the big benefits of tracking in the first place, is to teach you something, to educate you, to give you skills and knowledge that you can use long term when you're in a non-tracking period, which is really where we want you to be in the long run. So what are our tips for accuracy? So watching the VBC tracking tutorials, these are now uploaded on YouTube, so you can find them on Vegan Body Coach YouTube channel. Learning how to weigh your foods, learning how to track your foods, all of that good stuff is on YouTube. Secondly, use a scale 90% of the time. So try not to eyeball stuff. Obviously, when you're eating out, yes. But when you're at home, try to weigh things out as much as possible. And then over time, you get better and better at eyeballing those. But initially, 90% of the time, trying to use a scale. There's no need to track water, zero-calorie drinks like soft drinks, zero-calorie soft drinks, spices, low-calorie vegetables such as celery, lettuce. They really don't involve much if any calories. So it's just, one less thing to worry about tracking. Now, here's a key one, is to track raw or cooked foods when you are weighing them, not both. So either tracking all foods raw, so you weigh out your rice raw, your tofu raw, your broccoli raw, and then you go and cook them and put them into your meals. Or try to weigh your foods completely cooked if that's easier for you. So you go ahead and you make your batch meals for the week, you cook up all your tofu or your rice or your broccoli, and then you go ahead and weigh those out into individual meals. Just try to stick with one or the other. If you start mixing and matching, that's where things become a little less accurate, I should say. Personally, I find sticking to tracking cooked is easier for me, but I know a lot of my clients prefer to track raw. So it's totally up to you as long as you stick with it. This is just because of the changes in weights of foods once they are cooked. So we just want to be as consistent as possible with whatever we choose. Number 5, track meals ahead of time. So ideally the night before, you'd know exactly what you're going to eat for the following day. You're already popping this into your tracking app, so you know exactly how those numbers match up to your day, and you can make any adjustments you need to based on things that are going to happen. Like, has a friend asked you to go out for coffee? Okay, I need to make a little allowance there for that coffee. You can make those adjustments. So tracking the night before is quite helpful. At least track the food before you actually consume it. That way you're not left out at the end of a meal going, oh, I ate too much and now I only have 12 calories for dinner. You know what I mean? So tracking as much beforehand as you can. Prioritizing single ingredient foods is also really helpful to make tracking a lot easier. As I mentioned before, a meal of broccoli, rice, and tofu. I know that doesn't sound amazing, but you can flavor it, of course, to make it great. I'm just using that example because it's single ingredient items. You can easily look at a plate and go, okay, cool, that's broccoli, that's rice, that's tofu. I can log that really easily, as opposed to a meal like a curry or something of that nature, a stir fry, where you can't quite always determine the amounts of each individual food. So it's just a little bit easier to track single ingredient foods, less things to worry about. Meal prep, as we mentioned, really important. Batch cooking your food the week of, so you've got all that food there waiting for you, makes just life a lot easier. Opt for the green tick. So if you're using MyFitnessPal, the green tick will help you to ensure that you're choosing items that are verified and are not just inaccurately popped into the database. Especially on MyFitnessPal, there's a lot of items that are quite inaccurate, so you have to be aware of that. With other apps, you might be a lot better off, but looking for a verified item as much as you can. Number 9 here, if you're going to guesstimate anything, or I should say, if you're looking at any of these databases and you are unsure of the accuracy of these items, have a look at 3 or so different options of that same food. So if you're looking for vegan banana cake, for example, as a random example, you might click on one and it's 55 carbs and it's 2 grams of fats and it's 2 grams of protein. Well, you probably know that banana cake is going to have a lot more fats than 2 grams, so have a look at another one and maybe have a look at 3 or 4 different options and choose the one that's probably the most appropriate for the food that's in front of you, if you're not able to enter in the whole recipe and log it accurately, which is not usually the case with something like a banana cake. Someone's given it to you, you've gone out to eat it, you're going to have to guesstimate. So that's when looking at a few different options and making a wise decision based on that. It's not going to be accurate, but remembering that we are not aiming for perfection here, we're just aiming to be in the ballpark. Reducing eating out, obviously that's going to make things a lot easier because you're not going out to eat every day and having really inaccurate meals. If you eat out once a week, maybe twice a week, probably fine because it's such a small percentage of your total weekly intake. But if you're eating out every day, that's a large amount of your meals for the week are inaccurately logged, and you're not able to accurately determine the amount of oil that was used, the amount of sauces that were used, even the weights of the different items in that meal. Very, very hard to track. So reducing the eating out is quite helpful. When you are eating out, search for the restaurant, and if there's no data on your app, then using things like fist, palms, and thumb sizes to estimate the serving sizes is quite helpful as well. And I'll bring up a little image to show you how to do that in just a moment. And lastly here, logging alcohol as a macronutrient is quite helpful to achieve the accurate calories for that alcohol. So if you just log alcohol on its own, it will be logged and you'll see the calories go up. However, it won't accurately account for macronutrients because alcohol in itself has calories, but it doesn't. It's not associated with any one macronutrient itself. So what you could do is, for example, you have a beer, you have a Corona, that's 148 calories. You should divide that by 4, so there's 4 calories in each gram of carbohydrate, and that way you can log 37 grams of carbohydrates. So you can log that 37 grams of carbohydrates individually, and then that will give you that 148 calories, as opposed to logging the Corona on its own. It will mean that your macronutrients will be out of whack. Not such a big thing because our main focus is to ensure that the calorie intake is accurate. But if you want to be as accurate as you can, logging alcohol as either fats or carbohydrates is really helpful in that situation. And yes, lastly here, turning off steps when you're logging, turning off exercise tracking on whatever app you're using. If we're talking about MyFitnessPal, if you're tracking steps and exercise, it will add those calories back into your day, which is kind of defeating the purpose of us doing them in the first place. So we don't want to track those at all. Here's that image I mentioned of estimating portion sizes using your hand. So you can use the fist of your hand, as you can see there, as a cup size for things like grains, the palm of your hand for things like protein sources such as tempeh, tofu, etc. The thumb there for a tablespoon of different things, whether it's a sauce or a peanut butter, as you can see in the image there. So you can use that to help you kind of guesstimate portion sizes and log a little bit more accurately when you're eating out. However, over time, as you continue to track foods at home and weigh them yourselves, when you go out to eat, you would have learned all of these skills that you can then use them to eyeball portion sizes, or at least just make better decisions when you're eating out, based on what amount of calories and macronutrients you have left for that day. So there's our tracking tips for accuracy. I did want to cover some tracking tips for adherence here. Number one, schedule regular eating times. Really helpful just to eat at similar times of the day. Secondly, allocate small amount of spend, so amount of your calories for the day, to fun foods each day. So for example, maybe you enjoy some chocolate, maybe you enjoy a special coffee, maybe you'd like to have a bit of your favorite cereal each day. These types of things are important to include into your diet so that you're not feeling overly restricted. So you need to allocate some of that spend that you have available for you into these foods each day. Plan on-the-go foods for traveling. This is one of the big ones that comes up with so many clients. They go away on a road trip, they go away with friends, family, and they haven't planned their food. You might not be able to plan every single meal while you're away, but at least having snacks on you like protein bars, fruit, snack balls, protein jerky, all of these types of things, really helpful to have on the go so that when you are traveling, you're not reaching for convenient foods that are not going to meet your macronutrients and going to probably push your calories way out of bounds. Number 4, being aware of food environment. So things like pushing your food out of sight, putting it in the furthest place in the cupboard, putting it in a hard to reach location like in a shelf in your garage or something like that, so you don't have it right in your face. We don't want to have open packets of chips or candy or anything on the bench in front of us where we can easily grab it. It needs to be placed away. Oftentimes we'll forget about it. Another great thing is just to not buy it in the first place, and every time we want to include that thing into our diet, because we want to go get some ice cream, it means we have to get off our butt, we have to drive to the store, we have to grab the ice cream, we have to bring it back, we have to eat it. There's a lot more effort involved, and for some people that will actually mean they refrain from getting it in the first place because they just cannot be bothered. So some real good ones on food environment. Enhance your satiety through volume eating, so consuming lots of high volume, low calorie density vegetables in your day to keep you full and satiated. That will help you to adhere to your calories. Ensure adequate water intake between your meals, prior to your meals, and during your meals. This will ensure that you're not just relying on food when we potentially are just thirsty. We might be thirsty and we go and eat something, we could have just had some water. So making sure you are filling up on your water intake throughout the day. 7 here is practice some elements of mindful eating. Chew count, so how many chews are you taking per bite? Try to get 15 plus per bite. That will slow down your eating. It will allow you to digest a little bit better, have much better digestion as a result. Take pauses during the meal. Pause, have a chat to someone, look around, rest, whatever. Have a distraction-free meal each day where you're not distracted by your computer, your phone, your TV, your AirPods, whatever. Just eat the food. Sit there, enjoy the environment around you, enjoy the flavors of the food, savor the food, and slow yourself down. 8, don't skip all social events. This comes back to that feeling of restriction. We don't want you to feel overly restricted. We also want you to make sure that you're following a diet pattern that you can somewhat sustain long term. You might not be eating the same amount you are now long term when you're in a maintenance phase and you're no longer tracking. However, you should be following a similar lifestyle that you can sustain now during a fat loss phase that you will in the future when you're no longer losing fat. So that means we don't restrict social events. We still enjoy them. We enjoy family situations, friends, events, things like this, because that's all a part of living and a huge part of adherence to a fat loss phase as well. So we don't restrict those. Finally, here as I finish up this one, guys, tracking tips for eating out. Okay, so eating out, we've already discussed this a couple of times, but it's just such a huge part. We don't restrict eating out completely. We do want to limit it as mentioned, but there are some things to be aware of. So planning the meal out so you can still meet the rest of your nutrition goals. You need to know when that meal out is coming during your week and where you're going and all that good stuff so you can plan around it. This is absolutely key. Eat lighter during the day so you have more calories to work with when you're at the restaurant. A nice simple one, but it really does help so you don't feel so anxious or like you don't have enough calories left over to enjoy that meal out. We do want to enjoy that meal, so we do want to potentially eat a little bit lighter during the day. Even things like creating a morning fasting window, so you're not going to eat during the first half of the day. to allocate a few more calories to that evening meal when you are eating out. However, don't eat so light that you show up to the restaurant ravenous and end up overeating. That's a key point as well. So things like consuming a large amount of your protein before the meal out is actually quite helpful because, one, it'll help you with satiety, so you're not feeling super hungry by the time you get to the restaurant, but it'll also ensure that you're covered a lot of your protein targets because you have no guarantee that when you get to that restaurant, they're going to have high protein plant-based options for you. Number 5, look at the menu beforehand, and that will solve that situation for you. What protein options do they have? What are some of the lower calorie meals that they have? Okay, cool, I can make my decision before I go. And then when I'm at the restaurant, I'm not having to sit there while I'm hungry, looking at all these tasty foods and having to make that decision. And that brings us on to number 6. Make selections that, 1, they sound good, and 2, they support your goals. Remembering that not every single meal has to be the most flavorsome experience of your life. You can just choose some meals to be satisfying and to make your macronutrient and calorie goals for that day, because that supports your goal and that's a value to you. Number 7, remember that even if you make a poor decision, it only has the potential to mess with your results if you follow the screw it, I'll just eat whatever I want mindset after that meal. We don't want you to go into a point where you're going to start consuming everything on the menu, having a few drinks, all this extra stuff, when you could have just made that poor decision and then decided to own that decision, accept it, and move on with the plan. So don't allow poor decisions to affect your adherence to the plan. Accept it and move on. And lastly here, when you go out to eat, you get to use all of the information you've learned from tracking and making meals at home to help guide your decision making when you go out to eat. You get to put what you've learned to use. So that's one of the key concepts of eating out, is no, you don't have to track it completely accurately, but yes, we do want you to use the tracking habits, information that you've learned through weighing out your foods, tracking your foods at home, and getting used to what's in different foods, calorie density, volume foods, what kind of foods have protein, etc., to make really wise decisions when you do eat out. Alrighty guys, so that is it for today's installment of the DIY Macro series. Next up, we are covering making adjustments and assessing the scale for our final presentation. So this will help you to take all that you've learned and then use it to make appropriate adjustments as you go throughout your fat loss or muscle gain phase.